Welcome to Read Your Comics. Today I'm looking at Classic X-Men #1. So I wanted to take a look at this book because this is not the book that everyone seems to think it is. I see it posted a lot on Instagram. Most people just assume it's a reprint of Giant Size X-Men #1. But if you actually look inside it, you will find it is not. I don't blame people for not knowing that because most people probably read Giant Size X-Men 1 in other formats. You may have a facsimile edition, or you read it in like a Marvel Masterworks, which is how I first read it. There's just so many ways to read that story. It's very easy to just overlook this book. It's got an awesome Art Adams cover, so a lot of people want to have it in their collection just for that alone. And that's fair. I mean, it is such an awesome cover that it's definitely worth having a copy of this just for that. But if we get inside it, we'll find it's not really a reprint of GSX1. There's a lot more to it than that. Most people do know that Classic X-Men not only reprinted the Claremont, Cockrum, Byrne era of X-Men, they did include a few extra pages in the book as well of some stuff that Claremont kind of wanted to add afterwards to flesh out, characterization and kind of between the panels or between issues stuff that, he just wanted to flesh out. I don't think anything major happens in any of those. I've not read all of them, but most of the time they were just like little character pieces. Before I jump inside this, I do want to point out the logo of Classic X-Men here. I love the way they did this logo. Keeping this style of the slanted X-Men, but adding these little serifs just to give it that little touch of class, so to speak. And this classic, written in sort of an Art Deco style, it's actually credited in the opening here to Ken Lopez. And that's not something you see often in any comics for the logo designer to be credited. So as we look at the first page here, you'll notice this is not the first page of Giant Size X-Men #1. And you might be like, well, okay, so they added a couple of pages at the beginning. Keep in mind, this is only a 32-page comic with no ads, but Giant Size X-Men had 36 pages of story. So if this was going to be a direct reprint, they would have had to take a couple pages out. So if that's the case, if they're adding new pages of story and taking pages out of the old story, that's even more of a tip-off that it is not Giant Size X-Men #1. But what we do get is Scott coming into the mansion. Notice his visor's missing. He's coming in from Krakoa. This is something that we don't learn about until later in GSX1, but instead we're starting off with Scott coming in and basically telling Professor X that, something went wrong on the mission they were on, and he's come back without his powers. While he's talking to him, his powers kick on, and he kind of spazzes out a little bit. I guess it knocks him back into the wall, and Professor X is trying to help him just kind of get back on his feet. Then as they go through a little training session, gets him a new visor. He's like asking how that's going, and he's like, "Oh, visor's working great, but I feel like such a fool thinking the curse of my optic blast had been lifted, and I wouldn't have to live with that anymore. I should have known better." Professor X, yes, you should have. So here we have Professor X in his typical jerk style. He does show some empathy, though, by saying, like, I wish I could walk. I wish I could walk. You cannot convince me how I hate my wheelchair. Or you cannot conceive how I hate my wheelchair. Of how I envy you X-Men. I cope. I endure because I must. Yielding to the alternative, despair, self-pity is unthinkable. So he's trying to give Scott a little tough love, fatherly pep talk there about, stop wallowing in self-pity, get back on your feet, let's try to figure out how to rescue your friends. Scott says, well, how am I supposed to do that by myself? And Professor X tips him off to saying, well, it's actually something I've kind of been secretly working on. I've been scouting out a second team for, or a backup team, as he calls it, just in case something like this were to happen. Scott questions bringing a bunch of strangers in, and Professor X basically says, under the circumstances, there's no other choice. Now we get into the GSX pages. So these pages are from, this was the first page, if I'm not mistaken, of Giant Size X-Men #1. And pretty much all we're going to get through here are the recruitment pages, where he goes to pick up Cyclops, or he goes to pick up Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Storm. These are all the Cochran pages. You know, I don't want to dwell on them too much. I love these Storm pages, though. This panel and this panel in particular. You know, Sunfire just gets a little half page. Colossus gets, you know, a couple pages. Thunderbird. Then we finally get up. This seems to be redrawn by John Bolton, who does these extra pages. You know, that is a page from GSX1, but I don't think they shrunk it down. I think it's just redrawn. Just kind of a quick recap of the rest of GSX right here. They go to rescue the other team. They find them in the island. The island itself is the monster. You've got the Lorna Dane using her powers to lift it up. Iceman creating the like ice boat that saves them, and then they go back home. So you've got basically GSX. You get the recruitment pages and the rest of the story all wrapped up in 2 pages. So that leaves a lot of issues left. I mean, we're only on page 18 of this 32-page comic with no ads. So the rest of this is more or less just kind of the immediate aftermath between Giant Size X-Men 1 and X-Men 94. I like these parts with Professor X. He's wondering, like, you know, he's got a lot of X-Men now. And I like this, you know, outline around him with the little wave pattern here to show his mind, where he goes in eavesdropping on all the other characters. So here he's looking at Lorna and Alex Summers. And when they basically say there's too many people here, and I never wanted to be a superhero anyway. That's Scott's thing, not mine. Let's go do our own thing, not being superheroes. And as they start to kiss, Professor X, I've seen and heard enough. He backs out of that. So he gives them a little bit of privacy, I guess. Still, we got the mind wave there, so that lets you know that Professor X is still eavesdropping on Jean and Scott. I like it. I like his goggles there. He's filling out essentially like a post-mission report. Jean wants him to come and like listen to Banshee, who's playing piano over here. She says he's doing it. And when he says, no, I've got to finish this, she decides to leave. And she goes out to just get some fresh air herself and wonders about her and Scott's relationship. She's like, I know he loves me because I can read his mind, but he takes this job. So his job as leader of the X-Men comes first, and that bothers her. Cut back inside. We get Banshee playing the piano. I don't recall him being like a big into music character. Like, I don't remember that being part of his characterization. I mean, Professor X did pick him up at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. But I don't remember like in later issues that being a thing. But that kind of adds a little extra to Banshee. It makes sense that the guy that screams would be into music. Colossus is just sitting there doing some sketching. Nightcrawler comes in, startles him, and when he rips his shirt, he's like, oh, my shirt's ripped, and my mother isn't even here to fix it for me. Then we get Bobby Drake comes in. So this is where we're going to get some interaction between the original X-Men and the new team. And Bobby just comes in as just a straight up asshole. Insults Nightcrawler as, you know, looking like a demon. Insults Colossus as being a communist or from a communist country. And Nightcrawler and Banshee kind of puts him in his place, but Nightcrawler really drops it on him. saying like, "Oh, you're all for mutant rights as long as they look like you and have your political beliefs, but anyone else is not can't be part of your little group, huh?" And then is essentially like, Professor X invited us, so you can get bent. And slam, Bobby takes off. Peter took the most offense to it and actually says, like, he's got a point. I'm an outsider. I don't belong here. I'll probably just go back home tomorrow. But Nightcrawler convinces him, like, hey, look, you're a normal looking dude. I've looked like this my whole life and had to put up with this kind of treatment since I was born. You belong here because you were invited here. And so Colossus is essentially like, well, I'm not sure, but I shall try. And then we get to go outside. This panel was a little confusing to me at first because I was looking at Scott and Jean here and thinking like, oh, these are broken up into panels, but he's actually just looking at pictures on the wall. Thunderbird kind of looking at the team like, oh, they have history. And again, I feel like an outsider. And he's kind of going through his emotions when he too runs into Iceman. And Iceman, again, is super insulting. And maybe it's just being young and angsty still, because I guess he's only supposed to be about 19 in this. And, he freezes him and runs off. This kind of ends abruptly. It's like he freezes him and I guess he just leaves because there's no extra fight. He just breaks out of the ice. He's like, you can't handle it. Well, that's your problem that we're here. Cut to Jean. And look who shows up. It's Wolverine. And this is trying to establish that Jean, Wolverine, Scott love triangle in a way that I felt like never presented itself in the original comics much. All we ever really got was Logan pining after Jean and her never really reciprocating or showing any kind of like mutual attraction or affection to Wolverine really ever. Even when it gets to the Hellfire Club stuff and she's the Black Queen and, kind of does the double cross on the Hellfire Club themselves. And Wolverine's like, Jeannie, you're a girl after my own heart. And she's like, I know, and I wish I wasn't. To me, it always seemed like Jean had like no interest in him. But this tries to establish it like, he comes on to her and she's like, he's like, gives me the impression the feeling's mutual. And she's like, you're mistaken. Want to bet? And she's like, Wolverine, no, please, this is a mistake. So in this moment, it seems that way too. But I've never liked the Scott Jean or the Jean Wolverine romance. It's always just not felt organic to me, and that felt forced to kind of add it on later. These pages with Storm, she gets up to clear her mind. It's interesting how she's talking about the stars in the sky are different than the stars she knows in Africa. I feel like that's kind of addressed even in later issues too. Angel comes up and you think he's going to be pretty cool and be like, hey, like you fly, I fly. Well, we can get along. Like, I'm not against all of you new X-Men. And then he starts coming on to her like a little too hard. He's basically saying like, we can make music together, motion, a symphony of motion and emotion. I do not understand. It's something better explained with deeds, not words, starting with a kiss. So he's like coming on to her pretty strong. But then all of a sudden he's like, oh, I knew that little lowlife rogue neck creep was going to be trouble. So he spots Wolverine with Jean, swoops down, hits Wolverine, leads to a confrontation. Jean uses her telekinetic push to keep them apart. Wolverine loses control, and rightfully so. He was just like attacked out of nowhere. So you're kind of, whoa, Angel's in the wrong here. They definitely try to paint the original X-Men as not being very hospitable through all this. Now the original one in '94, I think they just kind of like, well, you've got these new X-Men, so we decided to leave. It's time to go. But in this, they paint them off as being like very jealous. It's like they just saved their lives. And now they're being very jealous. Anyway, so Storm ends up breaking them apart. Angel tries to play the victim of like, he tried to slash me with those claws of his. This is something too, because he pops his claws with his bare hands. And that's something that wasn't seen until like, I think X-Men 99, when you see that for the first time. And it's like a surprise. It's at least a Banshee. Now, Banshee's not here in this moment, so, you know, he wouldn't have seen it, but you'd think it would have been a topic of conversation. Maybe if Storm sees it. I don't know. That's a continuity error that also is kind of annoying. Because I think it's a pretty big moment when he actually pops his claws and Banshee sees it, and Jean's there too, and the Banshee's the one that's like, oh my gosh, those come straight from your hands. So, anyway, Angel plays the victim here, and Storm calls him out on it, like, whoa, you attacked him, you know? And he's like, yeah, when he tried to kill me, when it was his fault. Anyway, so this is where Jean shows some empathy for Wolverine, because where he lost control and now he's like all sad that he lost control. He's basically telling Jean to like, you know, leave him alone. He's like, I am bad news. And Angel tries to say, yeah, he's right. Stay away from him. And she's like, I am not afraid. And helps him up. Now we're going to cut back to, it's morning now. Professor X has been up all night worrying about what he's going to do with all of these X-Men. Jean basically tells him to come, or basically comes to tell him that she has decided to leave as well. And part of it is because of her attraction to Wolverine and not being able to, worrying about being able to control herself around him. Again, I hate that relationship, that dynamic. It must have been popular enough that they kept doing it. I don't think I'm alone in that, but it's always been something that bugged me. Anyway, so we wrap up with essentially Jean saying she's going to leave. Professor X gives her his blessing and, you know, says, of course, she's welcome back at the mansion anytime she wants to come. And that's where this leaves off. So out of this whole book, we got 12 pages of Giant Size X-Men #1 reprint, and the rest is all new material. So, again, this is not a reprint. This is not the book people think it is. It's worth picking up. If you're an X-Men collector and you don't have this book, grab it. You know, it's got some interesting character development stuff in it. I wouldn't say it's super important, but if you just like, you know, having that little extra bit, and it is written by Claremont, so it does fit in, you know, you should have this book. And that's all I got for this book. Until next time, read your comics.